What if Fortnite had its own Phase 1? And that Fortnite started out live as a humble comic, before comic books started getting a plethora of movies in the early 2000s that exploded into space. This isn't the MCU, this is the FCU, the Fortnite Cinematic Universe. So the ideas in the FCU will come from Fortnite's lore, but it will be changed. I am not doing a bar for bar. So the first film in the MCU is Iron Man. And there's only really two characters, in my opinion, that you can put in this first film. That is either Jonesy or the Foundation. And I've decided to pick the Foundation. Funny enough, one part of the Armor Bros, a matchup of Tony Stark and the Foundation. Ironically, that would still happen possibly in this universe, but Marvel being Fortnite. And it all begins with the Foundation, essentially Iron Man. I'm going to put my faith with the Foundation and with The Rock to carry this franchise. So let's begin. So in this phase, we need to world build the Seven and a possible different looking Seven. But we will talk about that after the first film. I'm going to use the first film's bases to build off. And do me a massive favor of hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Let's get to 2,500 likes in this video. Let's begin. A convoy of futuristic vehicles travel through a frozen wasteland. Inside the vehicle is the Foundation and his team. They soon stop and disembark to investigate an anomaly. They approach a crack in space and time. It's another rift, and about the 20th reported in the last week. These were becoming more and more regular. The Foundation runs some tests. It's another fracture in time and space, and it's worse than the ones before. More unstable, more unbalanced. The Foundation at this point is very puzzled, doesn't really know what's happening. He gathers the information that is needed and goes back to base, travelling from the frozen wastelands back to the Citadel, and tells his commander, Geno. The Foundation says, "Sir, we have restored order to that sector, but I'm concerned about the plan." Geno says, "Don't worry. Failure isn't an option. The 0-point testing is right on track." The Foundation speculates, and his research tells him it could be the 0-point testing that is opening these rifts. Geno dismisses this and said it can't be. "I've done the calculations myself." Later that night, the Foundation is off out, having some downtime. But then 3 hooded figures appear in front of him. They emerge from the shadows. They say, "You must halt your experiments with the 0-point. It's unnatural." The Foundation says, "We're trying to build a better tomorrow." The hooded figures say, "One day you will understand his methods are abhorrent. There is a better path." The figures begin to turn translucent and they begin to disappear. The Foundation says, "Who are you?" They respond with, "We are reality's last hope." The next day, Geno claims that he has stabilized one of the rifts and tells the Foundation and his team that whatever is on the other side of this rift is actually stabilizing the rift. It's some form of a substance, an alloy, and Geno surmises that that alloy could be used to stabilize his 0-point. Geno orders the Foundation and his team to travel through the now stabilized rift. Once they jump through, they are confronted with a dark purple cube. Suspicious, but following orders the Foundation gives the command. Team Ego extract the alloy. Use full power. As they open fire, the cube shatters violently. Instantly, a scream rings out, but it's not human. Suddenly, their minds are flooded with alien sounds, symbols, and thoughts. This cube wasn't just a material, it was a sentient being, and they just killed it. The team then looks up and realizes the terrible truth that that wasn't the only cube. Thousands of more start flickering and lighting up. A dark energy floods the space, and team members begin to change, their eyes glowing. They have been corrupted by an ancient force. The personnel on his team begin to turn into husks, and their spirits now empty from the void. For me, the inspiration for this comes from here. The Foundation narrowly managed to escape through a rift, taking pieces of the shattered cube with him. He needed to still complete his mission. His mission is everything. But going through the rift, he doesn't return to the lab. Instead, he stumbles through the rift into a lake house. It was eerie, It was dark. Inside he finds Geno calmly working on a strange device made of floating shards and a unstable energy source. The Foundation responds, "It was a bloodbath, we have to make sure they don't come through. How are they even opening these rifts?" Geno responds. He laughs. The cubes are so much more than that. But it wasn't them. I was opening the rifts. Geno claims to the Foundation it is difficult to open a rift to a realm between realities. So there was a bit of trial and error. And that explains the rifts that were opening around the frozen lands. So retrieving the element was always part of Geno's intentions. He just had to keep opening rifts until he found a stable one, or stabilized it. So remember, the Foundation has collected that bit of element, what Geno needed. Now he was about to use it as a pawn to say, well, if I don't give you that, you can't have that. He knows that he needs that bit of crystal, the broken bit of cube, to power this thing. And he's going to be like, no worries, I've got it. You ain't getting it off me. But he's going to check his pocket, and it's not going to be there. Unbeknownst to the Foundation, it already dropped out when he came through the rift, and Geno already has it. Of course, that's the big moment where Geno slots in the crystal into his device, and his machine starts powering up. And suddenly, unrelated to all this, a rift opens up behind the Foundation, and two armoured women fell through, dazed but alive. Yes, some of the Foundation's crew made it back, but Geno knows who these two are. It's his daughters. His daughters were part of the Foundation's team. Anyway, I feel like in that moment Geno can say something like, enjoy your little catch up because I hope it brings you solace to where we're about to go. And then he hits the final ignition. The 0 Point's energy at that point becomes blinding, taking over the whole screen, and it fades to white. And the next thing you hear is this. So that's the first film, The Foundation, The Loop. So we've got 3 acts, the Lake House, The Cube Awakens, and of course, Fractures in Reality, where we started. So I think this is a good way to start the FCU. I'm not trying to retell a story that's already been told. I'm using a very well-known fan concept that the Foundation and members of the Seven did work for a collective, the Oathbound, the Reality Warriors, or maybe something else. It seems like the Foundation, Geno and Sloane knows each other very well. And of course Paradigm has worked with the Imagined Order, so I just think it's a good way of grounding everything, and it creates tension between the two in later films as well. That the protagonist and the antagonist know each other, like they're family. Like I always get an image that Sloane and the Foundation have known each other since kids, and maybe even Geno. Okay, so I have been back and forth with who I would cast as Geno, and you got to remember, we are the MCU in 2008, so we're taking actors around that time period. I guess the obvious one would be to make who played Thanos. Josh Brolin. That would be a good casting. I think look-wise, and it's a bit early for the time period, would be probably a Luke Evans. But what he was doing in 2008, that would have been very early for his career. I feel like controversial. Let's consider Keanu Reeves, but I would push in the producer's room for Mark Strong. Now, the second film in the MCU is considered to be the Hulk, but we need a second film to introduce us to another member of the Seven, because that's the idea, and that the final film in this phase will be the first Avengers film, the first Seventh film. So we need to tell more about the last reality, in my opinion, and more about these members of the Seven. This film, I'm not going to tell you the name until we get to the reveal, but it's pretty obvious once it happens. Internal, Brutal Bastion, Laboratory, Knights. Yes, the frozen fields in the first film was Brutal Bastion, but at this stage, try and not think of them as islands, because obviously we pulled from different realities, but I am obviously connecting Brutal Bastion with the Citadel here. And for the final scene of the first movie, yes, that was at Loot Lake. So what Geno did there, created a Chapter 1 map and a loop, and that became an island, or was an island. So like any night at Brutal Bastion, it was a snowstorm. There was a painful chill to the air, like it hurt to be outside. That's the picture I want you to have in your head. Or the feeling. Inside, holograms are flickering, test tubes are bubbling, and a lone scientist is at work. Standing there silently behind him are the 3 hooded figures that we saw in the first film. But these are not uninvited. The scientist is well aware of their presence in that room. These hooded characters are a cornerstone of Brutal Bastion. But suddenly, the 3 women become stiffened. Their eyes shine a glowing white. They speak in unison, almost metallic, unnatural. They utter in that voice. There is a disturbance in reality. Soon, a vision from the hooded figures is implanted in the scientist's head. The lab erupts. A flash, the unstoppable projection of the 0 Point being burned onto the scientist's cortex. In the vision, we see the Foundation, the sisters, being pulled into another reality, along with Geno, basically playing out the events of the last movie. The vision ends. The scientists, startled. I'm starting to think this may be a problem. With the hooded figure standing over the scientists. You must find a way to save them. And what if I can't? And then reality collapses. What do I need to do, the scientist says. The hooded figure. For Genesis was successful. Scientist. Genesis? You mean Geno? The hooded figure says, you must discover what he did. A shard from a fallen god. Time is no longer on your side. Again, the hooded figures disappear. The scientist travels from Brutal Bastion to his complex. With a very familiar logo. Yes, you can thank me later. I'm making the scientist Vinderman. Thank you. Of course, since Vinderman was located at Brutal Bastion, he is well aware of the rifts, the anomalies that were opening up around Brutal Bastion's province, because as we now know, was Geno. But back then, the scientist slash Vinderman couldn't put his finger on it. In his vision, he saw the 0 point release energy. He thinks that signature will be easy to trace, but for whatever reason, it seems to be cloaked. But his computers pick up something else. On the edge of reality, he notices a cosmic energy almost leaking into reality. It's like no other. He's able to trace that location, but to his surprise, the location wasn't any reality. It looked like to be a realm between realities. By this point, he had heard the stories about the nothing and the last reality. But Vinderman had to go. He opens a rift and he travels to the unknown. The environment is twisted. The lands are corrupted with an energy like no other, but on the floor remains the broken shard of the cube that the Foundation destroyed. Suddenly, a voice like thunder shakes the realm. Was it you that killed my subject? From the shadow emerges the Cube King, towering, ancient, and burning with power. You tamper with forces beyond your comprehension. Vinderman tries reaching for his statue. This isn't about power, it's about survival, he utters. A brutal fight ensures. The Cube King could simply use his power to destroy Vinderman, but for whatever reason decides to fistfight him, like it's almost noble to do so. He is hopelessly outmatched. Just as the Cube King raises his hand for a possible final blow, Vinderman lunges for his bag and manages to pull out a rift device. Vinderman, desperate, says, I'm not dying in this broken universe, and activates the rift. The Cube King ends up just hitting the rock that was behind him after Vinderman just disappears. The final act of the film, he stumbles back into his lab, coughing, burned, bleeding. Without hesitation, he begins recording. Reality is fracturing, and the last reality is bleeding into ours. It's like a virus. I saw the Q King. Geno and the Oathbound are messing with things they do not understand, and if they do understand it, that's even more concerning. I need more time, but time is exactly what we're running out of. During the struggle with the Cube King, though, he did manage to grab a bit of that cube. The one that the Foundation killed. It should be enough to locate the energy signatures to locate the Foundation. He opens a rift, but it explodes violently. The blast appears to disintegrate the scientist, destroying his house and his lab in the process. Moments later, his robot Ray enters the room to discover the devastation, and Vinderman is presumed dead. I believe Vinderman Lost in Time, so that's why I didn't say the name in the first place. I believe Vinderman Lost in Time is a great follow-up and would build off the last reality's presence in the first film. Alternatively, Vinderman or Vindertech could be an interdimensional brand, a business whose tech was used by Geno. This could lead Vinderman to doubt himself in future, similar to an Iron Man arc, even though this is meant to be the Hulk film of the FCU. It could turn out the rift technology that Geno was using in the first film to open up these rifts was the foundation of Vinderman's technology. So the next film, Foundation 2. This story takes place months after the last film, with Geno, the Imagine, the Order, and the Foundation all thrown into the newly created loop. This concept builds off the idea that Geno threw his daughters into the loop for his own game, with the Inner Circle. And that took place in one of the comics, but in this version of events, they just happened to escape the last reality and gone for a rift that has now trapped them inside the loop with the Foundation and with their father. This film will also explore the memory erasing effects of the loop and how much of a struggle that is to try and get out for these heroes, for the protagonists, even the antagonists as well. Sloane will be left developing the IO from the outskirts while Geno will be trapped in the loop. For a while, in my version of events, time will pass slightly different from people inside the loop to people outside the loop. The Foundation is lost, but using his mind and knowledge, he figures out over several loops that he must be the last remaining person inside the loop. That could be the first act of the movie where he's confused struggling, and then he starts to get better, and maybe we can have some flashbacks to the Foundation and Geno, and maybe even Sloane, back in the Oathbound / Imagine Order sort of setup we have, and explaining their relationships. And of course, I know you can't remember your memories once you're inside the loop, but maybe the loop observation team can somehow access these with the equipment they have, and Sloane could be also looking at this from her position, building up their relationship in the film. He encounters characters like the Imagined and the Order, whose first instincts are to obviously fight. But the Foundation realizes he can't leave until he helps the Order and the Imagined. A lot of this lore comes from the Batman 0 Point comics. How he communicated with Snake Eyes and of course Catwoman. He couldn't remember who Catwoman was, but felt deep down that they had history. A very complicated one, but had history. So every loop the Foundation will go through, he will learn something else. He will try and jot it down as armor, a bit of paper, and we keep going from there. Of course, at this point, they wouldn't have known about their suits protecting them from the loop. And obviously, he had his mask off, and so did the rest of them. So the moment they went into a loop, boom, they forgot. So I see two ways this can go. Obviously, the Foundation and the Imagining Order, through quite a few loops, have managed to become familiar with each other enough for them to trust each other, and finally they make it down to the final couple of zones. Of course, it's a first come, first served basis, so they have to try and work out who's going first. Obviously, I can see this as the early days of the Foundation taking leadership, and he decides to either pick the Order or the Imagined, since the Foundation will become the leader of the Seven. But of course, this is where it doesn't go right. Unbeknownst to them, there's still a fourth player now, and that is Geno. Geno eliminates the Order and the Imagined. And then of course, he begins fighting with the Foundation. He sticks a pickaxe in the Foundation's chest, he pixelates and gets eliminated. Geno wins a game, he gets picked up by Sloane, and Sloane makes sure to remove Geno from the extra loop, meaning he gets all his memories back. That's quite an important point, because the Order and the Imagine and the Foundation will get another chance to leave the loop, and they are successful. But when they leave the loop, they won't have the help from Sloane. Basically, for those of you who don't know, when you leave a loop, you go into an extra loop, where you only remember your looped memories and not your memories before entering the loop. Or I could imagine a scenario where Geno does meet up with the Foundation, the Order and the Imagine and befriends them. He is well aware of his memories because he foresaw this problem as a smart guy, and he can manipulate them once again, where he will end up integrating with the Foundation, the Imagine and the Order, just so when they remember this stuff, they will feel even worse for getting outplayed. Now, because they're in a loop, they also can't communicate through talk, so the Imagine, the Order and the Foundation will have to communicate through sign language or visual prompts at this point. So maybe we won't be doing that with Geno, because having 4 characters try and convey that would be rather difficult. Or you could have it where later on in the film, when they get all their looped memories back, they remember every game they were actually eliminated by Geno, and Geno was just playing a game, and at that point obviously they won't remember who that person is, but they think, God, we got eliminated by this person every time. And then when they leave the actual extra loop, it dawns on them that they've just been heavily boxed up by Geno. In that scenario, Geno would have to leave one extra player alive so he doesn't win the game. But then again, he's Geno, so he could win the game and just go back into a loop every time. Build the Imagine Order with Sloane. So essentially, Geno becomes their friend almost every game. Obviously, these very thin-layered plot lines can be built on in several different ways, guys. Let me know in the comments where you would take it. But I also like the idea of Geno winning the game, the storm disappearing, and him going into the extra loop, find out Sloane is there to meet him, take him out the extra loop, and he gets all his memories back. If he hadn't already got them because he's smart, and then Sloane could be like, we have a problem. Something we didn't foresee about the loop. They go to this screen, and they're looking at the screen, and Geno is maybe not angry, but displeased. And we as the viewer wouldn't see this screen until later, because it's important. So the Foundation, the Imagine and the Order gets out, but before the Foundation gets out, he sees something in the storm, what he's seen before, and it's one of his team members that didn't make it out of the last reality, the Sideways or wherever they were. He sees a shadow form of a person. He sees it for a blink second, and it's got implanted in a plot point for later things, with the Trinity making it outside the loop, into the extra loop, obviously at different times. So the Foundation is alone when he first comes into the new world he's exploring for the first time with some sort of clarity, because now he's got his loop memories back. He remembers the Imagine and the Order by the interactions within the loop. not before. So of course this is happening on the Chapter 1 map. He could be walking through Wayland or Weeping Woods, I can never remember which one's which, and he comes across a cult. Of course other people have already made it out of the loop, and they're still very confused, they're still very tactile, and they call themselves the Comet Cult. And they take the Foundation prisoner because the Foundation doesn't really want to fight. He's trying to be tactful in a situation. He gets tied up, and so this cult worships the comet that crash landed on the map. Yeah, he's basically the sacrificial lamb for a comet that obviously crash landed in season 4. But before the Foundation is about to be dinner, an arrow flies past their heads and scares some of the cult members, so quickly run off. A robot mech comes out of nowhere. For now, think AIM. Quickly unties the Foundation. He literally puts the Foundation on his back, showing how strong this mech suit is, and they start running through the woods. You know, that sort of robotic pounding. And this guy's like, wow, I see you've met my friends, the Comet Cult. And the Foundation's like, what? The who? The Comet Cult. They give thanks to the comet, what crashed on the map, and I was essentially in it. So this is not the Visitor. This will be the Scientist, and this will be Vinderman. Of course, the reason I said AIM is this is like a temporary suit. At this point, you're not going to find out how he got to the island, but you're going to find out that he does retain all his memories, which means he didn't obviously rift onto the island, he rifted somewhere else. Of course, he survived the explosion. Not quite unharmed, but he survived. I haven't decided that leaves him like some form of a spiritual AI, and he eventually will build the Scientist's suit, or maybe the rift completely ripped him apart. He had to build himself anew. Just note that bit down. So you know he crash landed on the island, in the comet, in the pod. You don't know how he got there, but also rifted from where he was in the last film. I hope that makes sense. Unfortunately, it will make better sense when you see the whole picture. So the Scientist takes the Foundation to the other two people he's already saved, the Imagined and the Order. So the next act of the film is indeed them working out how to get their memories back. The Scientist already kind of knows how to do this. We have to go through the bunkers, which he has been using to get other tech. So he disables the bunker's protection field, goes in, grabs tech. Unfortunately, the Scientist is normally quick with this. You can see how fast he runs. They can't usually catch up with him. But because he was carrying someone and because he's been making lots of noise, the Loop observation team has spotted him. The Imagined, Dr. Sloan, and Geno can see. Geno's like, oh, so they made it out the Loop. It's at that point we work out the issue that Sloan discovered was that when you leave the Loop, you create a snapshot. And what they were looking at was the Aegis champion. And he's made it out the Loop, and he's just on a warpath very much like Geno. And he's coming for them. And of course, they're in the extra loop, so you can die. You don't get a second chance here. Geno was annoyed, no, because he sees himself as perfect, and a snapshot isn't, or at least shouldn't be. So of course, the Aegis finds them. Of course, the chance of a snapshot happening would have been hinted at earlier. The Comet Cult would have had a few people that would have looked the same. But at the time, loads of stuff would have been going on, and you probably wouldn't have noticed. But now thinking about it, could I just give them tomato heads and make them the tomato cult, but also worship a comet? Maybe they did worship the tomato head, but then the comet happened. Of course, the fight will result in pretty much a tie. The Aegis runs off. Will probably be picked up later by Geno and the Imagine Order, the Oathbound. So eventually the team will make it through the bunkers into the Oathbound's headquarters and see the 0 point, their way out. Of course, they'll be fighting the Oathbound guards. They'll be making their way through the base. They will come into contact at one point with Jones. The Imagine, the Order, and the Foundation will eventually jump through the 0 point. Of course, that will rift them back to the island, but now with their memories intact. So everything comes flooding back, with the help of the Scientists calibrating that 0 point. So I feel like the Foundation and Geno needs to have a heart-to-heart, a climax moment for this film. And they will talk, and they will fight. This won't really resolve anything, it will just act as a catalyst and to show where the two characters stand. The Foundation now very much realising what Geno was doing, and Geno now in full motion for what he wants to achieve with the 0 point and his perfect order. Geno could say something like, I'm sorry that this couldn't be our imagined order. So I know in the video I've been using either the Imagined Order or the Oathbound to describe the Oathbound or the Imagined Order, but in the film this will be the first time that Geno will say Imagined Order. Of course, our heroes have not decided to leave the island yet. They're back at the Scientist's base. So you have the Scientist, the Imagine, the Order, and the Foundation. So we are growing to 7 here. Currently got 4. Although they hear a massive crack. They look up and it's a rift in the sky. And the Foundation's like, what the hell's that? Oh, that's when I crash landed here on the comet, I may have also then made a rocket and left that crack up there. That's when Cube will come in. But we're not doing a butterfly event here. No. There'll be a few more cubes in that. And there will be a good reason for that, because of the next two films. Now, I'm probably not going to spend too much time on these next two films because they're kind of the same film, but it will be the origin and the legend. We're not having the visitor. Cry. We're having Jonesy. But obviously be kind of prequels to where we are now. So we've seen the origin a few times as the Cube King, and we've seen Jonesy as an Imagine Order agent. So the origin film can go a few ways. I feel like it should start when he's a kid. Either him growing up on a planet what got taken over by the last reality, or growing up within the last reality. I haven't quite decided where to take that yet. How he becomes a Cube King and how I think he's manipulated through the cubes, because he thought he was the king. But in his song he says, I didn't realise the cubes devoured. The cubes are the ones that are really in control. And after taking reality after reality, he finally starts to work this out. And he needs a way out. He starts planning against the last reality, trying for them to fail. And there will be a point where he stands up to the last reality. He battles the likes of the Cube Queen, the Heralds, and other last reality minions. He grabs a ship and he goes. Not before realizing the cubes are making their way to a powerful source. He manages to gather that intel and he follows them because he doesn't want any more planets to be devoured, any more realities. So he wants to protect this one. And the film will end with him approaching the Chapter 1 map. Of course, there could be moments if it turns out he wasn't born into the last reality. Him turning good again can be seen from members of his family that were enslaved by him, like his mother or something, just to humanize him. Then we have the Jonesy's film. Now that would take the same sort of premise. That it's a prequel. I don't know how much I want to show of his family life, leaving his wife, his kids behind. I think is a really emotional story that can be told. I mean, we've only seen it in a comic. He doesn't really mention it much, and it'd be nice for him to show us that side of him, his more vulnerable side. He took an oath that protected his family from the devastation that was left of his home reality. But at the same time, he never really saw them again. His wife, his kids, his grandkids, he's outlived them all. And that is a crazy, crazy story to put across. And something I would kind of still love to see in some way. Because you can see how he's become that with Hope in the Chapter 6 story currently. And like the Foundation, in my opinion, Jones's relationship with Sloane. Now, an element I want to throw into this film, comment section is probably going to hate this, but because we're going through a timeline of someone who is immortal, the origin could be as well, but for Jonesy, it's a fact. He's lived for thousands of years at this point. Jonesy's villain for this film will be Cato Thorne. One day, Cato Thorne time travels to a place where Jonesy's at, and they engage in some sort of scuffle. And he's like, okay, see ya. Cato Thorne randomly travels 200 years into the future, and it just so happens Jonesy's there. Obviously, no time has passed for Cato Thorne. It's like, how the hell are you still here? It can gather momentum like that before eventually go into a final battle, where he just nicks a time machine and that's about it. Where's Simmerdusk? But you could have a serious sort of point of view of this film, or you can and have some light relief with Cato Thorne and Jonesy interacting with each other. Now, who should play the Origin and Jonesy? I didn't say anything about the scientist because I think Joel McHale should still play the scientist. But what about the Origin and what about Jonesy? Well, for Jonesy, I'm keeping him. If he would want to do it, that's a different point because obviously he's more of a voice actor than a live action actor. I guess you people in the comments can consider Chris Pine or Chris Pratt. Now, I love Rahul Kohli as the Origin, but it's a little bit too early for him. I loved him in iZombie, although we would drop Troy for the same reason that majority anime or game voice actor. Now, around that time, he had no live action roles. Yeah, what about Josh Brolin? The Origin is quite stern. I liked him as Cable and Thanos, so I can see that fitting well. What about the Order? I can see a few names here, maybe Anne Hathaway. You also got to remember that Fortnite in this universe is effectively Marvel, so we would have probably had a Daredevil, maybe a Jonesy film, starring Jennifer Garner as the love interest there. So bring her back to play the Order. So the Seven are looking very much like Brie Larson, Anne Hathaway to play the Order, Amy Adams to play the Imagined. It's 2008 and she's Ginger. What do you want me to do? The Foundation, The Rock, of course. Josh Brolin, the Origin, Joe McHale, the Scientist, and Chris Pine, the Visitor / now Legend / John Jones. Troy Baker in 2008 would be 2 left of field. For Geno, still going Mark Strong. I feel that's a strong name. For Sloane, oh my god, Sloane I've been to and froing because everyone I want for Sloane would either be too old by 2008 or too young. I did consider Regina King, but I think I'm going to go for Nafadi Norton. Anyway, let's get into the final film of Phase 1. That is The Seven. So of course we got the Origin coming to the island after leaving the last reality, after he found out the cubes devour. With the scientists, the Foundation, the Imagined and the Order sitting around a campfire looking at that rift. And the cubes coming through, because there will be more than one. What I'm doing here, this may not go down too well with the comment section, but this is the 6th film in the franchise. The event that this film is going to take from is the convergence. The Cube Queen is obviously going to be annoyed with the Origin, who's going to wind up here, so there's tension. There's going to be tension there. The last reality is still annoyed with the Foundation's actions, as well as Geno's, when they work that one out. So of course the convergence and the pyramid will happen over Loot Lake, and they'll be trying to push the 0 point out, because now they've accidentally found this enormous power, because of course the last reality can track that cube when that was broken and the essence had been used by Geno, and they've located that now. That will be established in the opening act of this film. Some eagle-eyed viewers may notice we still got 3 members to work into the 7 here. Obviously we got 4 of them near a campfire, but there's still 3 more to get there. Jones is by far the easiest one. I will take from Chapter 1. The Chapter 1 event, and obviously the downtime, where we had communications between Ego and the Imagined Order. That said, they manipulated the 7 to carry out the end event. So they will loan Jonesy to the 7, and over the course of the film, Jonesy will realise that this is where he should be, with the 7, not with the IO. Obviously the Origin is also pretty easy. He doesn't want the cubes to devour anymore, so that's pretty easy. He will just help the 7 and then realise we are a team. And now you're saying, but you haven't even mentioned Paradigm this whole entire time. Oh, she's been here the entire time, you just haven't noticed. You must find a way to save them. And what if I can't? And then reality collapses, and not just this one. You must discover what he did, a shard from a fallen god. Time is no longer on your side. So when 4 members of the soon-to-be 7, the Foundation, the Scientists, the Order and the Imagine are standing around a campfire, the hooded figures appear to tell them that this is it. Obviously the Scientist has found a way to save them, and of course what was meant by the shard from a fallen god was the Foundation killing the cube, and that is currently why the convergence and the Cube Queen is now here. And of course if the Scientist could locate the island from the cube he took from the last reality, then the last reality can also do that. The Genesis was successful refers to the loop being created. Genesis, Geno, Double Tundra, very good. At this point, Sloane and Jones come out of nowhere. They're all obviously very defensive at that point, but they're like, don't worry, we're here to help. Or at least Jones is anyway. Sloane's got other plans. At this point, a ship crashes in the far distance, and the hooded figures say you need to go there, but we will offer one of us. And that's when one of the hooded figures will unmask, and it will be revealed it's Paradigm. I'll let you guess who the other 2 are. That's probably for Phase 9. If it was Fortnite, that would probably be the case. The 6 of them then travel to the site, pick up the Origin, because of course that's who crashed there. And then you have that shot, the V shot, you know, standing in unison, the 7 about to battle the last reality. Side by side with the Oathbound and the Imagined Order. And they battle, and then it kind of plays out how the Convergence did, without the island flipping. Basically, they probably try and overpower the gold cube, so it ends up blowing up, and then everyone gets sucked in, and then the new map, Chapter 2 map, is created. Post-credit scene! The Imagined Order exploring the rest of the space around this new reality. In this scenario of events, they check out the ice moon. They notice where someone had been sleeping or preparing something. They see a note. The Scientist, Vinderman, was here, which annoys the Imagined Order. And that's not even the biggest problem at the moment for these Imagined Order personnel, because they're about to be jumped by someone who's not very happy, because the Scientist, when he was there and built his pod to go on a comet, and that's how he got on the island, that's how it will transpire, he may have took something from the Ice King because he thought he was being scientific and all cool. And that might play a part into Phase 2 if we do it. My like goal is 2,500 likes. If I get 2,500 likes, I do another video for Phase 2. If I get 10,000 likes on this video, I will do a script for the first film. Of course, there's so much more deeper you can go with this. This is just an outline of Phase 1. But even with this very shallow outline, I feel like we've started some pretty cool character developments. with Geno and the Foundation being friends and then moving into enemies. Like, we haven't even finished that yet. Like, this is, of course, very early days. I feel like we balanced the introduction of the Seven. The only one that probably was a bit forced would be the origin. Don't say Paradigm. Like, that was very intentional from the start to make her one of the hoods. To have her and the other two very important characters being very mysterious characters. I'm sure you wanted to know more about the other two. The issue with doing a project like this is the first film is always going to be better structured. The structure of that first film delegates the rest of the films in that phase one. And of course, you want to leave a bit for the next phase. Hopefully, I've done an okay job. And of course, you can be my producers here, comment section. Comment down below what changes you would make, what you liked about this. If you do buy anything in the Fortnite item shop, consider using creator code MRJOY in the Fortnite item shop, #ad, #EpicPartner. And until next time, it's been your boy, Mr. JOY. Until next time, bye bye.